So as we've discussed previously on the channel, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, as well as John Carpenter's Halloween, often get the major bulk of the credit for making the slasher film genre popular. However, a film that throughout history has been overlooked and has just recently started to get its due is Black Christmas, which came out 4 years before Halloween in 1974. Black Christmas is about a group of sorority sisters who receive threatening phone calls from a mysterious man and are eventually stalked and killed by said man while they're trying to figure out who the killer actually is. This movie obviously heavily influenced Halloween, the big difference being of course that in Halloween the killer's an unstoppable soulless monster, while in this movie the killer seems to be a lot more mentally deranged. Now we've also talked about previously how slasher films usually didn't have big names in them until Scream came out. However, this was sort of an exception as it did have a star-studded cast, just more in the before they were famous variety. This film represented the early work of Olivia Hussey, a well-known television film and voice actress, Keir Dullea, who is known as playing Dave in 2001 The Space Odyssey, Margot Kidder, who's well known for being Lois Lane in the original Superman franchise, John Saxton, who is well known for Western and horror films and also co-starred with Bruce Lee in Enter the Dragon, and Andrea Martin, who has been nominated for 5 Tony Awards, winning 2 of them. I'm really happy that this movie is starting to get the notoriety that it deserves finally, because while yes, Psycho is technically the OG slasher film, this had much more of an influence on how the slasher genre would go throughout the 80s. So I'm sure you have a question now that you want answered. Who was the mysterious killer in this movie, and were all of the sorority girls picked off? Well, I'm about to show you as we take a look back at Black Christmas, 1974. So the movie begins at a sorority house where an unknown figure climbs his way in through the window and hides in the attic. About 10 girls live in the sorority house, but the only 4 you need to know are Jess, Barb, Phil, and Claire. The girls then get a disturbing phone call from some weird voice making these weird noises, who apparently has called them before. Barb gets fed up and tells him off over the phone, to which the killer responds that he's going to kill her and hangs up. Claire and Barb then get into an argument about the dangers of antagonizing the caller, and Claire storms upstairs to go pack. She's planning on going out of town, as are most of the girls, to be with their families for Christmas. Unfortunately, she ain't gonna make it that far as she hears something in her closet and she promptly gets strangled. Downstairs, the girls are giving a Christmas sweater to their house mother, Mrs. Mack, completely unaware that the killer is currently loading Claire's body into the attic. The next day, Claire's father is waiting at their rendezvous point, but obviously she doesn't show up. He decides to go to the sorority house, in which Miss Mack tells him that Claire could be at the fraternity house, and they go together. Maybe they should check the attic though. Meanwhile, Jess goes to meet her boyfriend Peter, who's a pianist. She tells Peter that she's pregnant, but that she doesn't want to keep it, instead is going to get an abortion. Peter doesn't take too kindly to this though, but Jess seems to have made up her mind. Back at the house, Jess gets another disturbing phone call, in which she hears the name Billy multiple times. So meanwhile, Mr. Harrison, Phil, and Barb try to report Claire is missing, but the douchebag dumbass sergeant named Nash doesn't seem to take them seriously. Nash then asks Barb for the call number to the house, and Barb tells him that it's fellatio. The reason I'm telling you this will come into play a little bit later. Meanwhile, Peter's having his piano recital, and it doesn't seem to be going very well. Further, meanwhile, back at the police station, a mother comes in and reports her 13-year-old daughter is missing. Jess also arrives with Claire's boyfriend Chris, who is a little bit more assertive about getting a search party out for Claire. Back at the sorority house, Barb is drunk off her ass, and she pretty much reveals that she's doing it because she blames herself for Claire's disappearance. Phil finally snaps at her to go to bed though, and Barb does just that. Meanwhile, let's check in with Peter, who seems to be taking his failed piano recital pretty well. Elsewhere back in the town, they've organized a joint search party for both Claire and the missing 13-year-old girl. Everybody goes to help out except Mrs. Mack, who's preparing to leave, before she hears her cat meowing from the attic and goes to investigate. She finds Claire's body in there, but before she can do anything about it, she's promptly met with a hook right to the face. Also, I guess the killer is super pissed off about being disturbed, as he has a big old freakout attack over it. Back at the search party, a girl begins to scream, and it looks like they found the body of that missing 13-year-old. Jess returns home, in which she gets yet another disturbing phone call, and she's had just about enough and goes to report it to the police. Uh-oh, Jess, there's someone behind you. Oh shit, it's just Peter. So Senor Manipulation over here has found up a great scheme. He's gonna quit being a pianist, and him and Jess are gonna get married, and she's gonna keep that kid. Let's take a break from that real quick though to finish off that joke from earlier. So the lead detective Fuller gets word of Jess's call and goes to look for the call number. He then confronts Nash about it being fellatio, to which Nash is completely oblivious, all while this other detective laughs his ass off in the background, which is hilarious, and this man laughs to the point where even though he's called Buchanan later in the film, in the credits they simply list him as Laughing Detective. And also as a side note, there's multiple parts in this movie where it seemed like the actors break character, but they just left it in, and honestly, I'm fine with it. It flows really well. Okay, yeah, so back to Jess and Peter. Jess tells Peter that she does not want to marry him, and she's still getting the abortion. Peter does not take that well and says you'll regret that before storming out. Just as he storms out, the detective shows up and they wiretap the house phones. They tell the girls that they have a cop posted outside, and if the killer calls again, that Jess needs to hold him on the line for a little bit so they have time to trace the call. They go back to the station, but it's revealed Peter is still outside watching the house from the trees. Meanwhile, it looks like the killer's on the loose again and he's about to kill Barb, but she suddenly has an asthma attack, which causes Jess to run to her. Jess tells her she must have just had a bad dream, and Barb goes back to sleep as the killer goes unnoticed. So then some creepy ass kids show up and start singing Christmas carols, and while this is going on, the killer stabs Barb to death with a figurine in her room. Jess then gets another phone call from the mysterious voice in which he repeats to her some of the things that Peter said to her earlier in their argument. However, the call ends just before they have time to trace it, so they still don't know where it's coming from. Jess then gets another call, this time from Peter, who's hysterical and crying, but he hangs up too before his call can also be traced. Detective Fuller tells Jess that he thinks Peter might be the killer, but Jess refutes this by telling him that Peter was in the house when one of the phone calls happened, so it couldn't have been him. Also, while this conversation is going on, there's some kind of shadow casually lurking in the background. Sure, that's nothing to worry about. So Phil's preparing to go to bed and she decides to go check on Barb first, which proves to be a bad move as she's locked in the room and presumably killed by the mysterious killer. Jess then gets another disturbing phone call, and this one's a long one, seemingly centered around an argument between two children, Billy and Agnes. This one was long enough to finally be traced, and the tracer tells the detective that the calls are coming from inside the house. Sergeant Nash then calls Jess and tells her to leave the house because the caller's inside the house, but Jess then decides to establish that classic horror movie final girl trope of doing the exact thing that she shouldn't do. That exact thing she shouldn't do is go upstairs and look for Barb and Phil, who she finds dead. And for the corner of the door, she comes eye to eye with the killer, who officially identifies himself as Billy. She slams the door on him though, and she's able to just barely escape into the cellar and lock herself in there. While in the cellar, she sees someone stalking around, but it's revealed to be Peter, who breaks in the window and goes to confront her. The police arrive at the house and enter the cellar, in which they find that Jess has beaten Peter to death with a fire poker. Jess is completely passed out at this point, so they put her in her bed, while the detective determines that Peter was the killer. And then everyone begins to leave. The detectives go back to the police station, and Mr. Harrison passes out due to shock, and Chris and another detective take him to the hospital. Well, Jess is all alone, but at least she's safe, except not really, because Billy's still in the attic. We then get a wide view shot of the house to end the film, where you can kinda just barely see Claire's body for the window, and then the telephone begins to ring. And Jess's fate is technically left ambiguous, but I think we all kinda know what happens next. So as you could tell by the ending, one really interesting thing this movie did is not reveal really much about the killer at all, or who he even was or why he was there. And there was a big part of me that wished they would have done that until, well, they did do that in the 2006 remake of this movie, and dear God, it was not good. The reason I'm labeling this as a Black Christmas look back instead of just Black Christmas review is I am begrudgingly probably going to look back at the two remakes in the future. The recent 2019 remake I have not seen, but the 2006 remake, oh god, it is just something else entirely. I personally would not recommend watching it, but that is something that we will come back to at a very later date. This movie I would recommend watching, because even though it came out all the way back in 1974, it still holds up as one of the greatest not only slasher, but horror films ever made. And while it did influence an entire genre, the risks taken in this movie, including not revealing who the killer is or much about him, or leaving an ambiguous ending were not used as often as you think. Ultimately, I don't think this movie should have ever been remade, because while yes, the remakes did help bring the original a little bit more prominence, my god, they really should have left it here. Especially since, while I can't speak for the 2019 remake, again, the 2006 remake was just not good. But in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, even though it's the day after Christmas, if you're looking to end the year 2020 with a good Christmas slasher, then I would definitely recommend checking out one of, if maybe not the inventor of the entire slasher genre. So what are we doing next week? Well, I don't actually know. I haven't made that schedule yet, but check my main channel on Tuesday to see what we're doing in January of 2021 on Free 16 Reviews. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is going to do it for my look back at Black Christmas 1974. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you guys for watching. If you liked the video, like it. If you didn't like it, then don't. If you want to follow any of my social media links, they're all in the description down below. Thank you to all 59 of my patrons currently named in the description for supporting me and all my channel. With all that being said, though, my name is Noah Taft. This has been my review of Black Christmas 1974, and I'll see you guys next time.